how to test conspiracy theories to determine whether it's some just wild idea or there's a grain of truth in it. Hey, this is Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. We talk about critical thinking. We talk about using critical thinking to gain influence and strength in your ability to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. In that, we also talk a small bit about propaganda, social engineering through communications, and some of the other aspects that are covered in the private coaching program that have to do with messaging, and it's very often in a political arena as well as a corporate environment. Now, what's very important to understand about the opening of this is how do you know if conspiracy theories are real or not? Well, we can test the concept to determine whether or not a conspiracy theory or something that is presented as an underlying reason for an outcome is true or not. Now, I'm not going to go through a whole method of determining whether conspiracy theory is real or not. But I will show you some basics because it's very important to understand this. We hear about conspiracies all the time. We hear about President Trump saying that there's fake news. We hear about this China connection with the COVID virus. We hear about, people who are arrested, who suddenly disappear or die in the case of Epstein, for example. We hear conspiracies about all the folks who crossed the Clinton Foundation, or what is the Clinton Foundation really doing? All of these things are in the minds of individuals, and when framed out as some hidden message that nobody wants to talk about, the first response usually is conspiracy theory. The truth is, conspiracy theory is a generic term for maybe inconvenient truths or ridiculous lies. In both cases, how do you know what is true and what is not? Now, the great thing about today is we have lots and lots of information. We have the internet. We have a lot of resources available to us. When you have critical thinking skills tied to a bit of research, you can very often determine if something is real or something is not. Now, it starts with credible sources. When looking at the COVID virus in China, what is the connection there? There are very clear connections between this specific strain of COVID virus and 2005 studies of bats in a Wuhan viral facility where this is what they're doing. They're collecting bat droppings. They're looking at what viruses or characteristics of these droppings are. And they found a strain in 2005 that is a match for the strain today. Now, how did they find the match? Well, when the COVID virus started to break out, they've taken samples, and then they wanted to find out, have we seen this before? Because if you've seen it before, or if it's closely related to some other virus, then you're more likely to be able to build up either immunities for it that you can then turn to a vaccine, or have some kind of origination idea. Well, there was a conspiracy that eating bats had caused the Wuhan virus. Now, there's also talk about other creatures that were eaten and may have caused the virus as well. How do you know what part of this is true and what part of it is not? Now, as a critical thinking individual, we don't think about conspiracy theories in the sense of conspiracy. We think of them as possible interpretations of the available facts. And we look at the question, is it possible the virus was something we've already seen before? Is it possible the virus was a man-made or a genetically modified or a mutated form of something we've already seen before? Is it possible it came from the wet markets? And if it did it come from animal A or animal B? These questions written down in a list and then carefully assessed, and then cross off the ones that are negative, highlight the ones that are potentially true, highlight the ones that have evidence supporting, and then go back to credible sources, and you'll most often discover that nearly everything called a conspiracy has some truth in it. Your role, what creates the real influence and strength, is being able to determine what is the truth in the statement. We can go through all kinds of conspiracies and look at that. Fake news, for example. Some who oppose President Trump say that it's a conspiracy that fake news is being put out into, to go against his campaign or to defame Republicans. Well, what is fake news? Well, that would be news that is not real or not representational of real activities. Now, we can always find evidence of news stories that in the past, before President Trump, that were later withdrew. So the initial story presented one thing, and then after the events progressed, they found that the truth was something different, and the newspaper went back and pulled the original news. Well, if you have enough news stories that are incorrectly reporting news, then that would be fake in the sense of not real or counterfeit a news story. Now, propaganda would also fall into the fake news perspective. If you're thinking about buying up a bunch of land around an area in order to do a housing development, and you amplify the news about crime in that area, that would put pressure on local officials to want to decrime the area or reduce crime in that area, which could allow you to get a favorable price on that land. Your amplification of the crime in that area would be real news. It's the truth. There's crime there. But that amplification of it through press releases or funding nonprofit organizations that would be talking about these issues or help them with marketing associated with that, that amplification would actually be a fake news because the attention given to the amount of crime is disproportional to the crime. So if you're saying crime is increasing and you're showing new reports of crime and you're counting minor crimes along with major crimes, which inflates the numbers, then ultimately that propaganda you're creating in order to gain your objective is actually fake news. So fake news does exist in many forms. It's not called fake news. A story that comes out and says, Democrats are cat lovers because they have a parasite. And this parasite influences their brains and causes them to like cats. Well, that could be fake news. Or it could be true. How would you know? Well, you'd have to test the population and determine whether or not they've got a parasite that influences their brain behavior or their risk potential when it comes to cats. And by the way, there is a parasite called Toxoplasma gondii that causes mice to not be afraid of cats. And they have found that the so-called crazy cat ladies actually have this in their system. About 50% of the French have this parasite in their system that reduces their inhibition or their risk avoidance behavior. So there could be truth in the statement. Then again, it could be a conspiracy. But you have to know the difference. So you would start categorizing, starting with authoritative sources. Then you start moving towards possible scenarios, and then you start categorizing the responses. Is this a possible interpretation of real-life events? What are the real-life events? Now, here's the challenge. Is all of this, even the 3 steps I've just given you, can take you down a nasty rabbit hole. And as you go down this rabbit hole, there are cognitive biases that could cause you to reinforce or create other conspiracy theories. So if you're looking into the Kennedy assassination, you might associate that to some side theory that has to do with the Illuminati or something. And then after you look at the Illuminati, then you find out that Masons have stolen all the real aluminum, and the aluminum that we have today is not real aluminum, and aluminum has magic properties. You'll start finding websites where clearly the people who are creating these materials have challenges with cognitive thinking. But this is a rabbit hole that you may want to go down when it comes to theories about how the world functions. Because, and here this is very important, is because the same concept I just shared with you today of credible sources, outlining the scenarios or possible questions or things that need to be answered, then going in and looking at categories and sorting out facts and fiction. That's a very easy way if you want to look at a new marketplace. If your conspiracy or your belief is that China has artificially lowered prices on goods in order to gain market share, substitute China with any competitor, substitute China with a different country, substitute China with another person in a marketplace, you can take the approach to test that, and you can see whether so sugar, for example, in the United States is subsidized by the U.S. government, and that subsidy, maybe it's not intended, actually makes sugar cheaper, and because sugar is cheaper and humans like sugar, more sugar is put into products. The conspiracy might be is the government wants you fat, but again, it could just be an unintended consequence of sugar subsidies. So you want to look at countries who don't subsidize sugar and see if there's similar obesity rates or similar consumptions. You build out the scenarios, but the last tip I can give you is to have a clear and specific objective. Because why would it matter if China's underlying pricing or government subsidies to product? Right now, postage from China is cheaper than postage in the United States. China manufacturer can ship a product directly to the United States for a fraction of the cost that same product would be shipped in the United States. So if the government is subsidizing the manufacturing and the government is subsidizing the postage, a Chinese competitor could beat you in the marketplace. Instead of worrying about the conspiracy side of that, worry about how can you value add so that your product is chosen over another product. So your product isn't an analog to the foreign competitive product. Inside of local markets, for example, around sugar pricing is so low that many alternative sweeteners have not been considered. So maybe you don't want to sell your sweetener based on price. So whether you're using stevia or you're using and I'm allergic to most artificial sweeteners, so I stick with some kind of plant-based or actual cane sugar. Or honey, you might be in a position to offer the health benefits of a alternative product that is naturally derived but not impacted by the sugar subsidies. And you can even explain the sugar subsidies or why sugar is so cheap and why it's included in so many products. My point being is once you have that list of facts, you can draw from those facts to communicate the message that's relevant to the outcome that you'd like to have happen. You can avoid falling into traps and believing things that aren't true. And you can also evaluate upcoming situations. Now, I know this was kind of a jumbled mess of things that I'm describing here. And if you have specific questions, please visit www.insidestrategicrelations.com. The key of what I'm describing here is don't discount a conspiracy theory. Most conspiracy theories are derived from real facts. That's why they're so believable. However, don't fall down the rabbit hole of chasing down the threads of these things unless there's some specific outcome that you can create. Because there are conspiracies in your own marketplace. There are conspiracies presented by the news. There are conspiracies that are used as a reason why you should vote a certain way. Go through the exercise of asking the questions, determining the sources, and just looking past the surface so that you can make better decisions. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. If you have questions about this or anything else that we cover, we do cover some social engineering and manipulation of communications, propaganda, those types of things in private coaching. If you have questions about that, I'd be happy to cover that in a future episode. If you have questions about the kind of the procedure to go through looking at a conspiracy and you want me to look at something specific, I'd be happy to do a case study. There are a number of things that I trace out for risk management, for example. When you're looking at supply chain risk, we do look at political considerations. But it's a practical skill, and it will help you make better decisions in business. I'm here to help you do that. I'm help you transform business relationships into profits and transform whatever. I'm done. Anyway, I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations, www.insidestrategicrelations.com.